Hello, my name is Tim Francis, and I'm going to give you my senior project presentation. When we began this class, this course, about Module 1, Module 2 timeframe, my organization was going through an internal audit. And that internal audit was of the safety program, and some of the findings that came out of that audit was some of the security documentation wasn't up to the regulatory requirement. So leadership within my organization, knowing that I am a security person by trade, they said, hey, let's put Tim on this and see if Tim can get our documents straightened out. So those audit findings drove my reassignment before I actually knew anything about having to do a senior project for anything. Then, simultaneously, we learned in our class that we need to do a senior project, and that drove the idea of my statement of purpose, which was to determine the need for a security program within flight inspection services. And the way I was going the Flight Inspection Services Organization is a Federal Aviation Administration organization. It's made up of approximately 550 federal and contract employees. We're located at 7 different locations around the country, and we operate 36 aircraft, and we have 2 basic missions. Our primary mission is the flight check program, and the best way for me to explain that without getting too technical is if you think about an aircraft flying from point A to point B and landing at another airport, there's navigation aids on the ground and in space that tell the aircraft or the pilot where he is along the route and where he is in reference to that runway or the center line on that runway when he's coming in for a landing. Well, what my organization does is we fly those routes and we land at those airports using some very sophisticated equipment to determine if the equipment is true, to make sure the equipment is functioning properly. And if it's not, we can get a ground team out there to repair it or replace it. Or if it's a satellite modification that needs to be made, then it'll be done from a computer here on Earth. The other program that we have is a transportation service. We have a few aircraft located out in Washington, D.C., and they're sort of a ferry service type of thing. What they do is fly around public officials, certain law enforcement entities, kind of like having your own aircraft, but multiple agencies use it. So it's not just like the FAA administrator or the director of transportation or secretary of transportation. Anybody can really use it as long as they charter it and pay for it. So that's their 2 missions. Now, the research involved in determining whether or not we had a need for a security program was to conduct, first and foremost, a gap analysis, see where exactly we are in regulatory compliance. There's 2 major orders that govern those, and the FAA order 1600.69 is the blanket security order that covers what facility security plans are supposed to have in them, different types of functions that are supposed to happen within the security realm at a specific or at any facility. And then the MMAC, or Mike Maloney Aeronautical Center, has its own order, 1600.21, which governs how security is applied from that 69 order here at the Mike Maloney Aeronautical Center in Oklahoma City. After the gap analysis, I conducted a security survey. I randomly selected some people to take the survey, and that analysis was to determine the compliance level and knowledge level of the employees. I did some additional research on threat and risk analysis, as well as vulnerability assessment, read over the workplace violence guidelines that are provided by the FAA, and a little bit on the global war on terrorism. The results of the gap analysis determined that documentation was not in compliance. They had specific documentation needed, but it was either incomplete or outdated or maybe there was personnel changes or telephone numbers that needed to change. Some of these documents were rather old, and they were at locations that may have not, when the document was written, may not have had a 911 service. Now they have a 911 service, so the documentation needs to reflect the current information. So in an emergency, which is an occupant emergency plan specifically we're talking about, they need to have the right information in the event of emergency so they can pull that document, see what they have to do, and execute and save lives and be safe themselves. Now, procedurally, I found that there was some procedure things that weren't being conducted. There are self-inspections that are supposed to be conducted by each facility. They weren't doing it. Some facilities were supposed to have a facility security coordinator locally, and they didn't have one. So those are all things that I found when I did the gap analysis. Now, the survey was conducted. It was 16 questions, 3 of which were opinionated, and that's why they're blackened out, and they're not actually included in this 63rd percentile figure that I show here. Overall, as an organization, they rated at the 63rd percentile on knowledge and compliance with the orders governing security. This 16-question survey gives a great baseline for the knowledge of employees. So now we can build training from here, or maybe in some places they know more about a specific topic than in other locations, so we don't have to worry about them, so we're not overlapping or giving them too much training to have to do. So this is actually an invaluable piece of information right here that I will be using throughout my tenure as a security coordinator here. The additional research that I did involved risk and threat and vulnerability analysis. And what I used was a tool called the MSHARP tool. MSHARP stands for Mission, Symbolism, History, Accessibility, Recognizability, Population, and Proximity. And this is essentially, it's an Excel document that has a 1 to 5 grade system for each one of these things. Notice that I don't use locations here. If I were to actually use the locations here, that could create this entire chart right here to be classified. So no specific location identified, but you can see this green area here, their mission is very high. You can see this one in blue, which is Series 1, their symbolism is very high, meaning that the symbol, that target would be very symbolic if hit. This next area is history. Is there a history of things happening in that area? Accessibility. How accessible? Do they have a base perimeter fence? Do they have gates? Those types of things. Recognizability. Driving down the road, can you look at that building and tell that it's a government facility? Population. How many people would be affected if an event happened at that location? And proximity. What's the proximity to known areas that have had problems with any specific threat? Tally all those things up and it gives us a baseline of where we need to work to try and improve the security program across flight inspection services. Based on that information, I gave some courses of action. The first course of action is status quo. That means do nothing at all. That's the way a lot of people would like to go because security is not convenient. It tends to hinder people's access to different facilities and those types of things. So I didn't recommend that. I just put it up as an option for them. The main goal or short-term goal that I offered the organization was to establish a program that will bring the program into compliance with the requirement. That's the main thing they need to do. And a long-term goal of having a benchmark program. If they can have a benchmark program that the other organizations within the FAA can look at and say, hey, we like what they're doing in flight inspection services. We want to do that in ours. That's the benchmark. That's this program being shown and utilized at all locations within the Federal Aviation Administration. So to conclude, the need does exist to have a facility security program within flight inspection services. They first need to establish a short-term program that brings the program up to requirements. And they need to strive to reach a level of being benchmarked across the Federal Aviation Administration with their security program. That's my briefing. That's my senior project. I thank you all. It's been a wonderful ride. Thank you very much.